Hello, plus two students. I'm Ruchita Sharma, lecturer in English, GSSS Berthi. Today we shall complete reading part 4 of the lesson Deep Water by William Douglas from your main book Flamingo. Students, a few questions for you before we begin reading this part. Have you ever focused on your fears? Have you ever thought that your fears are only ephemeral, momentary, or temporary? Do you know that your hard work, determination, and commitment can lead you to succeed over your fears? Thus, students, our learning outcomes for today are: first, to read the last part or part 4 of Deep Water by William Douglas. Second, to comprehend this part in continuation of the earlier passages. Thirdly, to critically analyze this part. Fourthly, to focus on new words and usage. And lastly, to be able to answer questions related to this part meaningfully and in your own words. So, students, here in this part, we shall see that William Douglas does not just sit down back at his home to avoid water forever. Despite his haunting fear of being in water, on the other hand, Douglas decided to challenge his fear. He personified his fear as Mr. Terror to deal with it once and for all. He hired an instructor to teach him swimming. He worked with the tutor for 6 months. Bit by bit, he familiarized each part of the body with water. He perfected different types of strokes and learned breathing while swimming. When he swam the length of the pool all by himself, little bits of fear still faced him. Douglas now kept swimming different lakes and rivers just to ward off his fear forever, till his conquest of his fear of water became permanent. Douglas learned from his experience that all we have to fear is fear itself. He went through dying and the terror it can create. Thus, he learned to live zealously. Now, students, let's read part 4 on pages 28 and 29 to know what actually happened with Douglas. I used every way I knew to overcome this fear, but it held me firmly in its grip. Finally, one October, I decided to get an instructor and learn to swim. I went to a pool and practiced 5 days a week, an hour each day. The instructor put a belt around me. A rope attached to the belt went through a pulley that ran on an overhead cable. He held on to the end of the rope, and we went back and forth across the pool, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. On each trip across the pool, a bit of the panic seized me. Each time the instructor relaxed his hold on the rope and I went under, some of the old terror returned and my legs froze. It was 3 months before the tension began to slack. Then he taught me to put my face under water and exhale, and to raise my nose and inhale. I repeated the exercise hundreds of times. Bit by bit, I shed part of the panic that seized me when my head went under water. Next, he held me at the side of the pool and had me kick with my legs. For weeks, I did just that. At first, my legs refused to work, but they gradually relaxed, and finally, I could command them. Thus, piece by piece, he built a swimmer. And when he had perfected each piece, he put them together into an integrated whole. In April, he said, "Now you can swim. Dive off and swim the length of the pool. Crawl stroke." I did. The instructor was finished, but I was not finished. I still wondered if I would be terror stricken when I was alone in the pool. I tried it. I swam the length up and down. Tiny vestiges of the old terror would return, but now I could frown and say to the terror, "Trying to scare me, eh? Well, here's to you, look." And off I would go for another length of the pool. This went on until July, but I was still not satisfied. I was not sure that all the terror had left, so I went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, dived off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles across the lake to Stampact Island. I swam the crawl, breaststroke, sidestroke, and backstroke. Only once did the terror return. When I was in the middle of the lake, I put my face under and saw nothing but bottomless water. The old sensation returned in miniature. I laughed and said, "Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me?" It fled, and I swam on. Yet I had residual doubts. At first, at my first opportunity, I hurried west, went up the Titan to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek Trail to Mead Glacier, and camped in the high meadow by the side of Warm Lake. The next morning, I stripped, dived into the lake, and swam across to the other shore and back, just as Doug Copron used to do. I shouted with joy, and Gilbert Peak returned the echo. I had conquered my fear of water. The experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. In death there is peace, there is terror, only in the fear of death, as Roosevelt knew when he said, "All we have to fear is fear itself," because I had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror that fear of it can produce. The will to live somehow grew in intensity. At last I felt released, free to walk the trails and climb the peaks and to brush aside fear. Come, students, let's now check the lesson for new words. The first word, sensation, which means feeling or emotion. I still have a sensation of pain where the mosquito bit me last night. Second word, miniature, which means in small size. I am an expert in drawing miniature paintings. Third word phrase is stark terror. He is in stark terror of being alone in his home. Stark terror means absolute fear. Next word, appreciate. To make analysis of. My teacher shall appreciate if I work hard. Next word, exhale, which means to breathe out. Next word, inhale, to breathe in. Learn to inhale deeply. Now, students, let's go through one main question related to this part of the lesson. And the question is, how did Douglas make sure that he conquered the old terror? Answer: Douglas felt that small vestiges of the old terror were still there when he was in water, even after he had learned swimming. But he faced his terror with full determination. He personified his terror by calling it Mr. Terror. He went to Lake Wentworth, dived off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles off the lake to Swamp Island. He swam the crawl stroke, breaststroke, side stroke, and backstroke. Further, he went up the Titan to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek Trail to Mead Glacier. He camped at the warm lake, dived and swam across the shore and back, just like Doug Copron. This made him sure that he had conquered his old terror. Thus, students, after listening to part 4 reading, we find that William Douglas was committed to make his life joyful by getting himself rid of his terror of water. He made all out efforts to defeat his fears. For this purpose, he began by hiring a swimming instructor. He learned swimming under him for 6 months. He did not leave it at that. He went alone to all the watery spots like rivers, lakes, ponds, beaches, and cascades around his native place. He was committed to curtail his fear thoroughly. Only after this his life became joyful and complete. स्टूडेंट्स हमने पार्ट 4 में पाया कि विलियम डगलस पूर्णतः अपने पानी के डर को हराने में जुट जाते हैं। वे एक ट्यूटर से 6 महीने तैराकी सीखते हैं। उसके उपरांत भी वे अपना आंकलन करने के लिए अकेले विभिन्न नदी, नालों, दरिया व प्रपातों में जाकर तैराकी करते हैं। वे ऐसा तब तक करते हैं जब तक कि वे निश्चिंत नहीं हो गए कि पानी के भीतर अब उन्हें कोई भय नहीं है। Thus, student, what we can derive from this lesson is that whenever we are faced with fear, we must encounter it with the same intensity as William Douglas did. This experience had a deep meaning for him, which he shared with his readers in the first person narrative. He tells us that there is terror or there is fear only in the fear of death, as he experienced. This relates with the words which Roosevelt has said, and those words are, all we have to fear is fear itself. Since William Douglas experienced a near-death experience, as well the terror, the fear of dying can produce. Thus, he learned to live life intensely and deeply. So, students, we have come to the end of the lesson where we have achieved today's learning outcomes, which were to read the last part or part 4 of Deep Water by William Douglas, to completely comprehend this part in continuation with the earlier passages, that is part 1, part 2 and part 3. To critically analyze part 4, then to focus on new words and usage, and lastly to be able to answer questions related to part 4 by William Douglas in a meaningful manner in your own words. Thus, students, goodbye for now. Keep reading and learning. God bless.